99% of businesses are not the right businesses to go and raise venture capital for. I would say for most entrepreneurs, that's the wrong capital. And I think being very clear around kind of what is the right capital for your business is a very, very important thing.
Let's go to the founding story of ZOE.
It was basically based on a confusion around kind of what I should be eating and an insight that with the power of data can completely actually solve the problem of what is the right food for me individually to be healthier. We can basically solve that problem in a much more data-driven way, a much more modern way. So that was basically the beginning of the idea.
How did you convince Tim to join you, and how do you convince scientists to join as a crowd?
The key answer is like hustle, and the second one is money.
You made fundraising sound so easy. So can you give us some advice?
As long as you can basically find your way in terms of getting a warm, strong introduction that can represent you and say, hey, take that call because I really believe in them. They want to actually really build something. And I would say that's kind of the key thing.
You also have very interesting ideas about company culture.
Culture is what you do, is not what you say. And you can write your values and you can put them on the wall. But if they're not specific enough in terms of the actual behaviors, then you'll fail.
Considering life expectancy, what would you suggest people do?
Food is kind of the most important medicine. That's why we started the company. Being very intentional about kind of what you eat for sure is going to increase your life expectancy.
What would you advise people here to work on?
Listen, my biggest learning is
Okay, guys. Guys, we're discussing outside. Can you show up hands how many people are founders here? Nice. And then how many people are students right now? It's like 50-50 maybe.
and how many people haven't started a business, but they would really like to start a business. Okay. And then last row of hands, how many people would like the idea of starting the business, but they're like fearful of starting a business? How many people are basically have started, the thing of starting, whatever, and are still fearful? That's okay. I'm fearful still too. It's okay. All right. Thank you.
Super. For the third guest of today, we have George, who studied at Tufts, I believe, in MIT, and founded a number of companies, sold a number of companies. He started Golden Group until acquisition. He did eFood until acquisition as well from Delivery Hero, if you guys know them. Then did House Trip and sold to TripAdvisor. And now is the founder of ZOE, who is one of the most successful health companies around. Just a lot of companies, by the way.
There's probably more.
It's actually more. I didn't want to point out to all of them.
Actually, the first startup I started was a music festival in my high school, and we did it to raise money to educate universities around the world about a province of Greece that is called Macedonia. There's a naming dispute. Anyway, I won't go into the politics details, but anyway, we did that, and it was actually my first kind of foray into thinking about, oh, I like to build stuff and do stuff. So so I started early.
Super. Let's go to the founding story of ZOE. Can you walk us there? Get us into your shoes.
Yeah. So it was the official date we incorporated ZOE is August 7th, 2017. And I had the idea of starting ZOE about a year before that. I just didn't know it. And what had happened was I had just sold both House Trip and eFood in the previous 2 years, and I decided for the first time in my life to actually take a sabbatical, in order to just kind of decompress. Entrepreneurship is a hard journey, and maybe kind of think through what I do next. And in the very first week of the sabbatical, I took a trip together with a friend of mine, who with whom we had worked together at Yahoo, and then we toyed with the idea of starting a business together, and he was going through a hard time on a personal basis, so we took a trip to um, to Greece, actually to Crete, and that was the first week of my sabbatical, right? And during that trip, um, we started talking about food and nutrition, and and for 5 days that we were in Crete, that was the only thing we're talking about, and and part of the kind of the reason that we started talking about is that I had just gone and did my blood test, and I found out I had a high cholesterol. I also did, at the recommendation of one of the doctors, what's called a DEXA scan to see what's happening inside my body. So DEXA scan shows the visceral fat, the internal fat you have in and around your organs, and I discovered that I was what they call a TOFI. TOFI means thin outside, fat inside. Uh, so so um, so I had done that, and then I went to the lipid clinic in very close by here in Chelsea, on Fulham Road, Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, and the doctor, when I asked them to tell me what I should eat to be able to kind of manage my cholesterol and my visceral fat, they gave me a leaflet from the British Heart Foundation. So I opened the leaflet, and then the first thing I saw in the leaflet was that I should not eat eggs. And suddenly, like at that moment, I vividly remember that I was in the clinic. Um, the image of my grandmother popped up, and the image of my grandmother in our kitchen in Greece, in my house, telling me, "Hey, George, don't eat, kind of eggs. Don't eat more than 2 eggs. They're bad for your cholesterol." And I said, you know, that cannot be true. Like, I said that was like what my grandma was telling me like 40 years ago. And so I went, and, I had time, and I started kind of searching. And the first thing I found, and it really kind of troubled me, was that the advice around eggs and cholesterol was based on just very, very few studies. Okay. And like very small number of studies. And one of the most seminal studies, and that was quite shocking for me, was a study called the Ansel Keys study in 1972, which went kind of, a bit before than my grandmother's advice, right? And the Ansel Keys study took 12 people. 12 people. They were all men, so basically representing just half the population of the world. Half of the 12 people, so 6, had high cholesterol levels already before the study started. Half of them did not. The study got these 12 people and said, all right, you're going to eat 4 eggs a day, and we're going to basically observe your cholesterol levels over the period of the next, I think it was 4 weeks or whatever. And at the same time, the study did not account for anything else these people were eating, drinking, or doing. So I said, like, okay, that doesn't sound right? Like 12 people, very poorly designed study, etc., just to basically come with an insight that then the whole world is using as basically the advice around eggs. So it got me thinking, and during that kind of trip with Jonathan, we start basically discussing about kind of how we had been um, um, doing things on the internet, and we're running basically millions of A/B tests or A/B tests on millions of points of data around figuring out what kind of what wins and what works. And we said, all right, why are we relying on the data of 12 people in a poorly designed study to actually kind of give that kind of definitive advice around eggs and cholesterol? And again, you can multiply that for any food, any combination of food, etc. And why haven't we applied the same principles of the internet in collecting an enormous amount of data to be able to really understand what's happening with people, and then with the power of machine learning and AI, personalize it based on actually each individual kind of body and organism. So that was the genesis of that idea. It was basically based on a confusion around kind of what kind of I should be eating. Kind of personally, John had exactly the same confusion, and an insight that with the power of data can completely actually solve the problem of what is the right food for me individually to be healthier. We can basically solve that problem in a much more data-driven way, a much more modern way. So that was basically the beginning of of the idea. So, hey, there's a problem. We both have this problem, and possibly there's a way to solve this problem differently.
Well, my problem, George, is with your solution. You went after every conventional business advice,
Yes.
which was launch early and get a product to the market. And on the contrary, you went and created the biggest study in the world in nutrition. How does this happen?
First of all, it's not clear yet whether we did the right thing or the wrong thing. So let me start by making that disclaimer. The reason we went basically that way, and just to give context and a bit more color to what kind of Kyriakos was saying, is that rather than start with a product, we said we're going to collect the largest data set in the world in the most scientifically advanced way, in order to give the best advice possible, best insight and best advice possible. And we took that call for multiple reasons that were important for us. It doesn't mean they were the right business reasons, but they were important for us. I think the first reason is that both Jonathan, my one co-founder, myself, and also our third co-founder, Tim Spector, we were at a stage of our lives. We're both, I was 42 when I started ZOE. Tim, he's now 66 or 7. He was like around 60, maybe. Jonathan, 42 as well. We're at a stage of our lives that we had some success, number one. So we wanted to do something that mattered and it was like really robust. So actually, we cared more about doing the right thing. Also because we had some success in the past, and therefore kind of that mattered to us, and we're older. The second thing is that because we had some success in the past, we were able to raise a lot of money to actually take that approach, right? And the third thing is that we took a view that, again, rightly or wrongly, because you can argue this both ways, that science is important both for us, so science matter for us in doing the right science, but also we took a view that in a world of fads, science will be important and increasingly important to more people going forward. Whether it will be important to the whole world or not, we didn't know, but we knew it's going to be important for at least a part of the world that was like us, and that part of the world will be increasingly larger. So that's why basically we said rather than start and launch a product, and we had that debate very early in the company's timeline. I remember vividly we're squatting with like a conference room at one of the VCs that we know in Golden Square, and that was before we actually started the company officially. And I remember us being on the whiteboard and articulating the two options we had. Option one was to go the way that we went, to do this huge clinical studies as a start of something that has become the largest clinical study in the world of this kind. Like we have like more than 300,000 people on it now. And option two was to launch a product that later on companies like Levels, etc., did. So actually, the idea of Levels way before they did. That was the alternative option. And we said, no, we're going to go the big data way and let's go at it at the hard way, but what we felt is going to be the right way for the reasons I mentioned.
And you mentioned Tim, who's a third co-founder. How did you convince Tim to join you? And I believe in this room, like many people are wondering, how do you convince a scientist to join as a co-founder?
The TLDR, and the key answer is like hustle, number one. And the second one is money. So right just after that trip in Crete, somebody, because I was chatting about the nutrition thing, not to start a business, but chatting. Somebody recommended I read the book, The Diet Myth, which Tim Spector, my co-founder, had written, and in fact, I think it's probably his best book, and I highly recommend you read it. And so I got fascinated about that because it was the first time that I was introduced to this idea that with this kind of trillions of bacteria in our gut, and that can be kind of quite more influential to many things around our health, our mood, and many other things. So anyway, I got very fascinated about this whole world, and also about Tim. And then somebody mentioned his name. I said, "Oh, so do you know him?" And this person who became actually our first investor knew him, and he connected us with him. Uh, um, and I'm very, very grateful for this wonderful human being who did that. And so we went and saw Tim, and initially, and Tim was a very warm, as a lovely guy, but of course he met these two kind of passionate entrepreneurs in his office at St. Thomas Hospital, and he says that he said publicly he thought he will never see us again, because there are many people who actually have gone and pitched ideas to Tim, and then they disappeared. And so he told us, like, okay, if we could raise money for this, sounds cool. You sounds like credible. You seem like credible guys, etc. I'm saying, fine, okay, we'll go and raise the money, and we can do it. So that's what we did. Basically, he actually he trusted us, and also he saw the fact that we delivered after a few months in terms of raising the money. But all started because it came from a very warm introduction. And so if you can hustle to get a warm introduction to somebody like that, it always helps.
You made fundraising sound so easy. So can you give us some advice?
I mean, fundraising has become easier because we've built companies, right? And that kind of plays a role. I would say, for me, the biggest advice in terms of fundraising is think about what would be is getting basically in the other person's shoes. So I know Matt here was here before, like in getting to Matt's shoes. Basically, Matt will never look at, or any investor will look at kind of a cold email. Most of them won't. Right. So you can take that assumption. So think about, okay, who are people in Matt's network that basically, if I can get a warm introduction from, that I am somebody basically that kind of is credible and have all the kind of different kind of qualities of an entrepreneur, means that basically you'll be a hustler, you'll be resourceful, you'll be resilient, you really believe in this idea and you have something going for you on that. I don't subscribe to being the best in the world, because you don't know that, and I don't like to compare myself to other people anyway. And I don't think people should anyway. So as long as you can basically find your way in terms of getting a warm, strong introduction that can represent you and say, hey, take that call, because this person actually, like, I really believe in them. They want to actually really build something, and I would say that's kind of the key thing. The second thing, on which I agree with what Matt said before around aligning incentives, is that you need to be very clear around kind of what are the right types of investors for your company. I would argue that 99% of businesses are not the right businesses to go and raise venture capital for. My uncle has a pasta business in Greece. He never raised venture capital. It's a very nice business. He built over kind of 45, 50 years. He borrowed money from the bank, and now it's doing like a very significant volume, and he has another 2-3 competitors in Greece, still doing a very nice job. He's very profitable. So I think the second thing is that we're talking about kind of funding as this kind of mythical VC world, that basically we need to attract Accel, Index, and Sequoia from. And don't get me wrong, it's in their own best interest to actually popularize that narrative, because what they want is influx of people, right? But I would say for most entrepreneurs, that's their own capital, right? And I think being very clear around kind of what is the right capital for your business is a very, very important thing. And I would say that many times that from the very beginning. Like, for example, if I were to start a pasta business in Greece, definitely I wouldn't go to Matt to raise money for, but sometimes you don't know that, and you need like some starting capital, which you typically get from friends and family, and then you figure out along the way whether what is the profile of the company in terms of the asymmetry of risk and return that will kind of dictate what type of capital is the best one for you. So I would say that a very important thing is to really be brutally honest with yourself around what's the right capital, because as Matt said, again, it's about incentives. People who are in the venture capital want one asymmetric opportunity, which means that basically they invest a lot of money, because then the returns can be humongous. But most businesses do not fit in that category, in my opinion.
You went from the big study in aggregating a lot of information and then using that information. And I've rarely seen companies that actually, like, the usual rule is we need a lot of data and we're going to do something with that data. But like most businesses don't do this correctly. So what have you done there? What was the first product and how did you take advantage of all that information?
Yeah, so it's interesting to say that. So we raised our first money, our first round, which was I think something like $6 million, with 8 slides and 50 words, and rightly or wrongly, what we said on those slides is exactly what we've done, which is also untypical, right? And again, we'll see how that play out. But the whole idea and very conventional kind of approach was to use the clinical studies as an early version of our product. A very hacky, very time-consuming, very complex early version of our product, and then simplify the stats a bit more, simplify more, and then arrived at the kind of at the consumer product. So we had this idea about this consumer product from very early on was going to be a test we sent at home. You do the test, right? We give you personalized insight and personalized advice. Basically, we can score any food for you. We give you a very simple tool, like a photo scanning app, to actually scan anything and understand what is the score of the food and what is right for you, and then to also give you personalized probiotics, right? That was our business. These 3 slides, I can show them to you actually. There's one slide that says that's what ZOE is. And our first study, with the exception of probiotics that came later, our first study was a very complex way of doing that. What did it mean? It meant that basically we get 1,000 people, 700 of them twins, to come to the hospital for a day and be cannulated on a bed, and basically we measure their blood for basically 12 hours. Then send them at home with more testing to be doing, wearing a continuous glucose monitor for 14 days, and then doing 3 blood tests, but also doing like a gut test and another test, logging their food for 14 days, right? And then in the end, out of that, after about a year, get basically a PDF with some slides of results, and then a PDF with like some scores around the right foods for them. So that was our very first product, effectively, as part of the clinical study. And also, we use the clinical study as a way to recruit customers with a proposition, right? You'll discover basically based on
So your go-to-market was actually through the study?
the go-to-market was basically recruiting people to the study as a way to understand what will resonate from a marketing perspective. Then they do this really intense kind of testing, like even at the hospital, and then we'll give them results in a very clunky way. As part of that, we're actually getting the feedback. Then we did the second study, which has basically the evolution of actually going from a hospital to being at home. So only at home, 14 days again, right? And then after that, we're able to launch the consumer product. But with all the learnings of the study and all the data that allow us to build the algorithm to actually make the predictions much better.
Was that the point that COVID hit?
Yeah, so just before we launched our commercial product, and we were planning to launch our commercial product when we was there in spring of 2020, COVID hit, and my co-founder Tim had this idea and said, "Oh, and I'm sure most of you remember those days. Like it was like dark, right? We didn't know what's happening in the world. Like everything was doom and gloom. People were dying. You didn't know how serious it was. In fact, you thought it was very, very, very serious." So he said, "Oh, Tim comes with 10 ideas a day, right?" And he says, "Oh, should we do something to help here?" And again, very kind of aligned with the principles we had with the beginning of the company, where we decided to go the hard way, but with all the right way around science, investing, etc. We said, all right, why not? Actually, this is one time where actually matters to really do something. So we launched this app to track basically symptoms and to connect them with what happens in terms of how you develop the disease and whether you die, etc. And the reason why we did that is because our original idea about ZOE was around, if you can use large-scale data from consumers, millions of consumers, then by basically using that data in a community citizen science approach, you get more powerful personalized insights and advice to all these individuals. So we use exactly the same approach with COVID. And to our surprise, we built this up in 5 days and it became viral. It got 5 million people in the UK using it. And it became the largest community science project in the world around COVID. I'll give you an insight. The anosmia, which is the lack of smell and taste, which is a core symptom of COVID, um, we proved with this study scientifically and published a paper in Nature Medicine after a few days that it was a leading symptom of COVID, and that got a lot of governments then to actually make it a core symptom of COVID. So I'm sharing this story um, only to say that sometimes you say, I'm going to do something. I have no idea. I have no idea whether it's going to work. I think, but I have a good feeling about why I want to do it. Right? That's the insight I want to pass. And in our case, I actually want to help, want to be there, kind of when it matters for people. And sometimes you don't know what's going to happen. In our case, actually, we never thought we were going to have 5 million people after 10, 15 days using the app. And looking back, is one of them probably the most wonderful things we've ever done in our lives.
And then these 5 million people that you mentioned, was it the second wave of customers? Would you say that were using it for that?
Yeah, I mean, by doing that, again, you're doing something you don't know whether it's going to basically play out, and suddenly luck happens, and that meant that basically ZOE was a household name in the UK. And so when we launched our commercial product, we managed to effectively transition that trust from the COVID app to what we're doing around nutrition, because at the end of the day, the same underpinning was there, was basically real science, powered by the people for the people. So we managed to transfer that by doing the podcasts and also launch the product, and that gave us a lot of basically awareness and credibility.
At what point do you decide to create more product lines? I've seen lately, I was in a Waitrose, I believe, and I've seen the new supplements that went out, which are very interesting because it's not powder or anything like this. So how do you think about product lines?
Yeah. So first of all, again, coming back to the original slides, we always had from the very beginning this idea of doing supplements for the gut based on the data and the insights. Um, the reason why we went into that area, which was the original idea, but actually became way more kind of obvious to us as we went along, is that um, there is a very important kind of and sad, I would say, but real truth in terms of following advice on anything that's hard, and eating basically eating well, right? Um, in the end, it's quite simple, right? One could follow the 7 words of Michael Pollan, right? And um, eat real food, mostly plants in moderation, and do well, right? That's the honest answer. But applying the advice on a consistent basis for human beings is hard, right? It's hard for me. Like, you go for like, a stretch of 4 months, and then, most people, 90% of the people, fall into kind of bad habits. So part of our thesis with Zoe was basically by changing the locus of control from the doctors and the system to the individual, and empowering the individual to really understand what's happening in their body for every food. We're able to actually motivate them more to actually keep that 4 month stretch for like 9 months and 10 months. But the reality is still 90% of people, kind of, they will fall off kind of the cliff. They will have bad habits, etc. So part of the idea of actually giving them this kind of whole food prebiotic is to help people by giving them simple solutions they can apply in the everyday life. Because at the end of the day, the more simple a solution is, the more easy it's for people to apply it.
I think you also have very interesting ideas about company culture. So how intentional were you about the team you're building at the beginning, and how did you do it?
Yeah, so we had like a number of failed attempts at company culture, I would say. And if I look back, I would say that I would probably score myself 5 out of 10 in terms of what we did, which is still very, very good. But I still believe there's so much more we could have done. So I would say the first insight is that culture is what you do, is not what you say. And the classic mistake we made in the beginning is we wrote our values. And you can write your values and you can put them on the walls and they can be simple and they can be memorable. Um, but if they're not specific enough in terms of the actual behaviors, right, then you'll fail. And I'll give you a classic example of a mistake we did and how we corrected it afterwards. So with a value around kind of customer obsession. I mean, it didn't mean anything. And I'll give you an example of why it didn't mean anything. And I remember in the very first days of us kind of launching a product, a team comes to me and says, George, with some good news and some bad news. I said, okay, tell me the bad news first. I said, we kind of, we sent kind of results to 69 customers that were wrong. I said, shit. Okay, tell me the good news. It says, we've solved it. We're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I asked them a simple question, which is, okay, who are these people? In what part of the program they are? Kind of what age they are? What are they trying to solve in the health? And they said, oh, that's a great question, George. We don't know. Well, let's go back and actually figure it out. So that basically sparked the insight in my mind that although we're very intentional in terms of saying that actually we matter about caring about customers, we're not very prescriptive in terms of explaining to people what that truly meant in terms of the behavior they should actually exemplify on a day-to-day basis to make that happen. So we changed completely from a principles and aspirational values perspective of what we want to happen to a behaviors values perspective, which actually what we celebrate as a behavior, and also as importantly, what we don't tolerate as a behavior. So for example, in this case, the value then kind of where the value as kind of start basically with the customer, right? Understand their needs and work backwards to fulfill them. Which in that case was a very, very clear way of actually what the team could have done to actually solve the problem. So anyway, to cut a long short, we're very, very intentional about codifying that in behaviors afterwards. The mistake we did was that we had too many. So, and I would say that the different types of values, kind of, again, looking backwards, if I were to do them again, there's usually 2, 3 values, maybe 4 maximum, that can make a really big difference. And I would say just choosing on the 2 or 3 values we're really going to prioritize on and specific behaviors around them is what I would do next time. And I think that will basically kind of really kind of determine kind of what company you like to be. I'll give you a very practical, simple example, which may not be right for everybody, but it will illustrate the point. There's this guy in the Valley called Frank Slutman. He wrote a book called Amp It Up. You know the book, right? He built basically 3 companies to more than $1 billion. And he has a very, very clear way in terms of basically what matters for him, which is about narrowing the focus, upping up the ante on the speed, and increasing basically the quality and the standards. And most people will tell you, oh, you need to compromise one of the 3 because otherwise you cannot do it. And for him, actually, all 3 are important to happen at the same time. And these are the core operating behaviors he's celebrating. And for kind of, if somebody believed in that approach, I would say these are the 3 values. I would give Frank Slutman's book to the people and said, okay, read this book. And if you don't like it, don't come and work here. So I'm being very pointy and very simple about the operating behaviors and very specific. It's a good thing in the beginning because it allows you to actually be very, very clear. You may be right, you may be wrong, but be very clear about what you want to actually celebrate and what you don't tolerate. So that's what I would do next time.
Considering life expectancy, what would you suggest people do in their diets so they live longer?
Listen, there's the theoretical answer and then there's a practical answer. Theoretical answer is kind of food is kind of the most important medicine. I really believe that. That's why we started the company. And being very intentional about kind of what you eat. for sure is going to increase your life expectancy. There's no question about it, right? Um, and at the same time, it's hard, right? And at the same time, it's hard. And so I would say that if there are ways to help you eat the right food in the right way that make it easier, I'm much happier for people to do that versus not doing it at all. And the example I'm going to mention is Ozempic, right? Um, about I think 8% or 10% now of the US is on Ozempic. Has single-handedly changed the curve on obesity. It's had like extremely powerful downstream effects um, around not only kind of diabetes, which is kind of course, the primary effect, but also cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. Of course, we need to let it run basically kind of few more years to see basically the full picture. It has some side effects, about 6% of people. But if that helps a lot of people eat better, and in many cases, actually people change their eating habits. A lot of people, 45% of people take Ozempic, exercise more or start exercising. And there's a very simple reason why. If you are, and I have people in my family who are like that, if you are basically in the extreme obesity level, there's a lot of other issues coming with that, including mental and psychological issues. So if by taking this drug, people, kind of control their appetite, eat on average better than they would have eaten otherwise, start exercising and finding hope in life, that's a great thing. That increases life expectancy. The reason I'm giving this answer is because based on the company I started, you expect me to say, hey, let's get everybody to eat better and that would be the right thing to do. And I will say yes. And right, if there are pragmatic solutions that for people that would have find it hard to actually do that, they can find actually renewed hope, better health in their life, etc. So be it. That's great.
You also invested early in some crazy companies. So how do you find investments, and then how do you judge good teams?
The reason I've been lucky with my investments is because I never set out to be an investor, and 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 that's a very important um, constraint that has helped me to do one thing. So one of the rules that I keep using now in my life about many things, or most things in life, from hiring to pursuing an idea to pursuing an investment, is that I say, if it's not hell yeah, it's a no. If it's not hell yeah, it's a no. So by having the constraint of not being an investor, what you basically eliminate is the need to make an investment. So if you're an investor, basically you have like, oh, I need to find the investment. I need to find an investment. Right. Now, if you don't have that pressure on you, then you have the reverse psychology, which is like, if I see something, I say like, fuck, that's like so great. Boom, I'll invest. And that's how I invest it. Is basically it's because I don't have the pressure to invest. If I see something and I'm saying, you know what, that's like super interesting, I'll go for it. That's how it has happened. Now, there's a counter argument to that, which is that people like mine may tell you, hey, you need to basically kind of spread your investments, and particularly an angel investment, to see like a lot of different things and invest in many different things. And probably that's right. Right? But in my case, because I have this kind of constraint that allows me to only kind of write checks when I say hell yeah, that has served me well so far.
I wanted to ask.
I would say the hell yeah heuristic. I would say I would in general. I don't like to give advice, but for me at least, is a life lesson in terms of if you can try to put constraints in your decision making, right, that would allow you to actually be very clear whether you're hell yeah or not, and then kind of act on that. Meaning basically, don't hire somebody if you know hell yeah. That actually will help you a lot. That has helped me a lot for sure.
What would you advise people here to work on?
First of all, I don't think I can advise anybody what to work on. I think the only thing I can listen. My biggest learning is hit the ball a lot. That's my biggest learning. And the reason I'm saying that is that action produces information. Um, People will tell you, "Oh, fine, what are you the best in the world at?" I mean, I have no clue what I'm in the best world at, right? And why do you basically need to compare, right? But but by hitting the ball a lot, you at least understand what you like, right? And also what you feel an affinity, and you're excited, and you want to spend all the time working, or not. And that's a valuable signal, right? In terms of basically on what to do. But I would say to figure that and to is you need to hit the ball a lot. And and hitting a ball a lot is an interesting idea that um, is very much antithetical to what we've been taught in life. In life, we've been taught that you know what, you need to be successful, or otherwise you're a failure. And I was reading this autobiography over Christmas about a famous basketball coach in Greece, Panagiotis Giannakis. And of course, like kind of people have this kind of stereotype that he's been a very successful basketball player and coach. But if you look at his kind of biography, he's hit the ball 20 times, and I can tell you, kind of, we only remember maybe like the 2 or 3 times he's been successful, but he's been quote unquote unsuccessful 17 times. And he's been fired from teams, and he kind of like did mistakes, etc. And I would say, but what matters is about hitting the ball a lot. It's about hitting the ball 17 times, and it doesn't matter, like kind of whether it succeeds or fails in the conventional ways. What matters is producing information that helps you then focus on kind of something closer to what you enjoy and what you love. There's a very famous, actually very interesting press conference that another Greek guy in basketball, Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Greek freak, did after the kind of their kind of loss in the NBA finals, in the NBA playoffs 2 years ago. When people ask him, how do you feel that this season was a failure? And he's like, that's the wrong question, right? Is it a failure? Like you tell me that basically that like the 15 years that kind of Michael Jordan played and didn't win championships was a failure? No, that's part of the game. You're trying and you keep going. So my point is, like, if there's only one piece of advice and insight, is like, just act and do shit and forget about kind of the notion of failure or success. Because at the end of the day, by doing things, it will get you one step closer in understanding what you like and what you're good at, maybe, and then you have an affinity with. And for me, that's always a success.
Have you heard about the founder mode from Paul Graham lately?
Yes.
What's your take on it?
There's 1,000 different ways to run a company, as there's 1,000 different ways of being smart, in my opinion. So I don't think it's a one size fits all. The second point is that if you look at it kind of mechanistically in terms of the different kind of ways of building a business, and in terms of the time invested towards actually doing something of essence, productive, impactful, doesn't make sense. The answer is yes, it does make sense, right? Like, it resonated with me. Like, I hate kind of bullshit meetings. I hate kind of I believe that typically founders bring a different kind of mode to a company. They're the energizer bodies. They build a different level of passion and intensity. And if you want to maximize the success of something, it's probably kind of has a higher chance of doing that. Does it apply for everybody and every founder? I would say no, right? So you need to know, basically, first of all, whether you're comfortable applying that, right? Can you build a company that's successful without being in founder mode? Yes. So I would say being in founder mode has many different shades of gray, and it needs to feel something authentic and natural to you if you want to actually do it. If you take to the extreme, for people who can apply to the extreme, can they be on average more successful? I would say probably yes. But I think for people to apply it, it needs to feel natural to them and applied at the right kind of intensity or not.
And for my last
What do you
question,
think?
what do I think about founder modes? I think there is a lot of advice out there that is bullshit advice. And one of them is the classic startup advice you get at the beginning is go and hire a number of VPs, like get a chief, a CTO, get a VP of sales, a VP of marketing, and so on. I think that's the exact wrong advice that founder mode hit the nail on. Because usually people just go and hire a number of executives, and then the executives don't do the work. So then they want to invite, they want to bring to a company many, many more folks to work under them. And what ends up happening is like you have an extremely expensive business to run with no results. And in my view, like my philosophy about this is much more closer to how Leonidas was running the 300s, which is if you are running a battalion or if you are running into a fight, you should be the first in the line. So the leader should be in the first in line. They should be the first that dies.
I would agree. And I think another thing to build on that is that um, one way to think about founder mode in a different way is to go and hire many founders in your team. And founders can come again in many different kind of ways, shapes, and forms. They don't need to be kind of, necessarily tech founders. They can be like a community founder or something else, right? That's important.
Last question. You're giving startup advice to your younger self. What is it?
Listen, at the end of the day, and that's why I asked the question about fear. I would say the kind of one of the most unspoken things in life that is probably prevalent on kind of 9 or 10 billion or whoever, how many people we have in the world now. Almost every single day is fear and the relationship with fear. And it's something that's not spoken about, right? Because fear is terrifying. It's paralyzing, right? And fear has two daughters. Daughter one is paralysis and inaction, and daughter two is action. And the whole bet is how do you actually are able to be in the action mode and not in the paralysis mode, right? Because eliminating fear is impossible. Everybody has fear. So if there's only one thing that I would hope for my children to have is to be able to have a conversation with fear, right? And in that conversation, rather than put fear on the driving wheel on the bus and my daughters to be like the passengers, used to be the other way around. It's to say, hey, fear, I hear you. I see you. We're together. Now just go and sit on the back of the bus and let me drive.
Incredible. With that, can we have a couple of questions?
Yes, Georgia, I'm a really big fan actually of ZOE. I actually do my own nutritional studies with myself. So it's not clinical at all. But what does the future look like for ZOE? For example, I see you're wearing an Oru, I'm guessing, like integrating your data into wearables.
Yeah, listen, I think the future of Zoe is on two axes that are all about how can you actually make our advice kind of simple and accessible by more people, and how can we make our solutions simple and accessible by more people. So let me give you an example. It's not something I'm saying we're working on, but let me give you an example of how the future could look like. So I was showing Kyriakos before the meta glasses. I don't know if people have wear the glasses. So my view of the world is we're moving to a world that at least one of the dominant interfaces will be vision and voice and sound. All right. So imagine you're wearing these glasses, and the glasses can see everything you eat. Right? It will happen, right? Because if your eyes can see what you put in your mouth, then your glasses can see what you put in your mouth, right? So one example of that future is that rather than having to log food or to scan a menu or kind of think about food, is that you're going to be wearing glasses, and they'll tell me, "Hey, George, okay, it was like not a great day today. Like, you're already like, at 2,000 calories, and like, your score is like 35. Maybe like, just kind of, take it easy for the rest of the day and maybe think about kind of not eating for the next 3 hours before you go to bed so you can have a better sleep and tomorrow is a better day." So like that idea of basically of when we originally conceived kind of ZOE, ZOE means life in Greek, right? And there was this idea about this kind of personal AI nutritionist in your pocket, right? And that is where I think the future is going on that dimension, is basically is through this kind of new dominant kind of interface like voice and vision, things are going to start becoming kind of more and more and more effortless.
Hi, thank you so much. My question is, you've been in a bit of a privileged situation because you had companies before and you were able to get that funding quite quickly for a science-based product and vision. For those of us who aren't in that privileged position, science produces its own regulatory issues that can end up, or the product can end up in the graveyard before it even becomes feasible. So what advice would you give to us who are trying to bootstrap that period where we're trying to get the product to launch, but we need to produce feasibility studies to say, hey, it is effective and it's going to work, it's safe, and it's not going to kill anyone?
So it's very difficult to give advice on abstract in terms of these, but there's always different ways to go about it. So one example is that let's say that you cannot raise money to do kind of whatever you need to do the scientific studies to prove the efficacy and the validity or the safety, whatever that is, right? So I would ask myself the question, right? What do I need to basically kind of prove to an investor, right? What are the kind of the smaller steps in order to be able to get them to actually at least invest in kind of in a phase or etc. So it could be, for example, that you go and test the product with like a dummy product and see that actually how much interest there is in terms of customers in terms of like, solving a problem, etc. Like, so for example, like, what I've done with other startups is before you even launch a product, you start running ads or you ask customers to buy a product, which is like a fake product, just to test basically the interest. So like, are you solving, like, is your product solving something that when you deliver it, it's going to have like, a lot of demand. So that's one thing, right? The second one is, let's say that even that is not enough to actually get somebody to invest in the studies to be able to prove the safety, right? All right. Can you run some other, basically gather some other data and run a simulation to show that actually based on a simulation, right, and some data, which is a smaller amount of data, you predict that your product actually will have like the right kind of efficacy and the right safety. So I would basically kind of try to kind of put it in chunks that can give basically an investor some comfort that's either investing the whole thing is worthwhile because it'll be returned, or is kind of de-risked, or I will chunk it in smaller phases to basically be able to kind of invest for the next inflection point and then the next inflection point. But in the end, you will need basically some kind of basically to show some belief that is this a product that people actually will buy, right? Is this a solution that based on either data, simulations, a scientist, something that actually can be delivered, and is that kind of de-risked to be able to actually to raise some funding?
Hi, thank you, George. We've talked a lot today about product hiring and funding, but one component that has been missing a bit is go-to-market and sales. So I was wondering, could you give some advice on figuring out the right go-to-market strategy for a new startup?
Again, very difficult to give advice kind of on abstract because there's so many different types of startups. First of all, is it a consumer startup or is it like a business to business startup? But at the end of the day, I think for me, the kind of the way I would figure out any go-to-market strategy is to really go out and talk to customers, right? And I think by talking to customers, first of all, you you understand really kind of what's the right kind of pitch and the right positioning, and you're going to iterate that multiple times. You understand, how much competition there is, what you're competing basically against to grab their attention. One framework that I've always loved using is the jobs to be done framework, which was, I don't know how many people know about jobs to be done. All right. Okay. So jobs to be done is a framework that was invented by two guys, Bob Moesta and Clayton Christensen. There's a book called Demand Side Sales that I would advise people to read and or watch the video around. But the whole fundamental premise of demand side sales and jobs to be done is that sales is not selling. Okay, sales is helping somebody make the progress they want to make in their lives. So basically, and they talk about taking this kind of customer view. That's why they say demand side sales, not supply side sales. So I'm not selling to you. I'm trying to understand what is the progress you're trying to make, and I insert myself basically because I'm the best kind of way for you to make progress. And the way that they advise in figuring that out, which could be an interesting kind of thing to consider, is that is to do a lot of kind of demand side sales interviews for people who could be interested or ideally have bought maybe your product or a type of similar product. And you do what's called demand side sales interview, where you sit down with that customer and you map a timeline of basically around that particular topic, kind of, a timeline of exactly what's happened in their lives over the last kind of 2-3 years, and the different points where they thought, oh, I need to make a change and make progress, and all the way down to the point where they decide to buy a solution or something. And by mapping that, you're figuring out what's the best way to kind of insert from a positioning perspective your product in this customer's lives, but also what would it take to actually convince this person to actually use your product to make progress. So I would recommend you read that demand side sales or watch any videos online. I think it's very, very helpful to do interviews and figure out go-to-market.
Hi, George. I'm Greek as well, so Kyriako, thank you as well. Speaking of go-to-market, I have a question around like how you guys managed to get all of this success story in the UK, because in the UK, I mean, it's people are very sick in terms of the health span. So although we live longer, like we spend the last 20 years of our lives with a chronic disease. So my question is, people are not very proactive when it comes to their health. So how did you manage to educate users initially to come up like with their nutrition and testing and looking at their gut microbiome and all of these things?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is that ZOE is probably the first company I started. Not the first, but one of the very few companies that suddenly it becomes like the center of conversation for every dinner party I'm going to. And for me, that's sort of very early on that we hit the nerve, because it's something that we food is something that we probably do for 60% of our kind of non-sleeping lives. Like thinking about, okay, how many hours do you spend in terms of like preparing food, kind of eating food, cleaning, kind of shopping, thinking about it, etc. So first of all, something that's actually, regardless of whether people are officially kind of obsessed about being proactive about the health, it's something that is really top of mind on people's lives, right? So that's the first thing, that it was a kind of very ripe as kind of an area. The second thing is that we were lucky because we launched the COVID app, and that really propelled us into accidentally to kind of millions and millions of people kind of knowing us and trusting us. So when we actually then launched our podcast, which was a way to actually give this, kind of great nutritional advice, scientific nutritional advice, free to the world, that was met basically with a lot of demand, because people are fundamentally interested. It's something that people talk about all the time, right? And so it was a confluence of these two things: an interest that is there in people's minds, and also us being kind of lucky to actually get some kind of awareness because of the COVID app, and then actually transferring that into a subject that's so interesting in people's lives.
One more thing, like, did you find a specific demographic being more interested into this?
We spend so much time, I think, about, okay, what's the right demographics? So we focus on one, etc., because everybody's interested in food and everybody's interested in health in some way, shape, or form? The answer is no, right? Although I have to say, if I were to single out a particular kind of segment, bless you, is people around the ages around 40 to 60, and the reason for that segment for us is that this is typically the time where and that holds true for my generation. I think the younger generation is actually more proactive about health. I would say, based on what I see. But for my generation, when you start, going to that age of 40, 50, 60, you start thinking about things that you haven't thought about in the past way more. And the reason is because you're getting older and like there's less of life ahead for you, and therefore you want to take basically better care to actually to live a healthier life. So we found basically kind of a demographic there that was quite, I would say, more interested. That's our core demographic. But it's been a challenge because it's a proposition that can apply to so many people because everybody's interested in.
So as founders, there is a lot of information around and there is a lot of advice. And there's more of generic advice that think and make a decision, but nobody really teaches how to think. Apart from that, end of the day, the founder is making all the decisions, which means sometimes there's a lot of pressure that the stakes are really high. So how much should I be delegating? What should I be delegating? So how do we make effective decisions and also kind of get some of the pressure off while we are making very big decisions, which could feel like the stakes are really high.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, there's like, kind of millions of decisions that a founder has to make in the lifetime of a company, right? And the first thing is that I think be very clear kind of the type of decision that basically kind of you're called to make, and then spend kind of the appropriate time. So basically there's like, two-way door decisions, which means that like, okay, you can always reverse it. So basically, typically for those decisions, just be faster. And there's like, decisions that are one-way door decisions, which means that basically you really need to think it through about kind of what do you do. Like, for example, like, if you're going to go fully remote as a company or not, it's a one-way door decision. It's very difficult to reverse. I mean, it is reversible, but it's hard to reverse. That makes sense. So I think that's one axis, and the other axis around kind of the risk profile in terms of upside and downside. I think Matt talked about asymmetric or symmetric risk on the upside or the downside. So first of all, think about what type of decision you're trying to make, and again, the kind of the smaller kind of the asymmetry and kind of the more two-way door decision, the less time you spend, because at the end of the day, it's kind of very, very kind of reversible. Then the second thing is that I would say that every kind of decision, a good practice to do is to have an alternative, or to think about an alternative. And the way I'll tell you the way I do it, I'm not saying it's right, is that let's put two options together, and rather than try to debate whether my option is better than yours, right? Let's work as a team and say, okay, we'll take option one and we'll try to make it as great as it can be. Then we'll put it on the side. Then we'll take option two, and then we'll try again to make it as great as it can be, and then we'll take a decision, right? And so that was my second heuristic around, every great strategy needs an alternative strategy, and try to make the best out of it and the best to make a call. The third thing is that in most decisions, in my opinion, at least the important ones around hiring, etc., if it's not a hell yeah, it's a no, and that's a decision. And then the last thing is you're gonna get a lot of advice, but you're responsible for the advice you get. So any decision is the right decision as long as it's your decision.
Makes sense. And
Very
just
good.
sorry,
Go ahead.
a follow up. So there's always new information that's coming in with any choice that we make. Also, when I'm making a choice between option one and option two, there's a constant addition of new information. So how do we know it's the right time and the optimal time frame for making any decision?
So you're saying you made a decision, new information comes in.
Yeah, that keeps coming in.
Yeah, I think that that's goes back to fear, basically, because the biggest fear you have is that, oh, I have now new information, right? And should I change my original decision or keep going, right? And I would say that if it's very clear to you, listen, first of all, you make a decision, you go for it, and you stick with it. You don't actually second guess it. But then if information comes in that says actually that was the wrong decision, the biggest challenge you have is actually overcoming your fear and putting your fear in the back seat to actually reverse the decision. But that's how I would think about it. But you'd be very clear that the new information is actually telling you that actually you need to reverse the decision. And I would say that there's one company that we could have had a much better outcome, and the reason we didn't have a better outcome is that I made a mistake in not pivoting the company. It was good, it was doing well, but if we had pivoted the company, it would have actually been a much better outcome. And the biggest kind of reason why I didn't pivot the company, it was fear. I didn't have the courage to do it. Okay, so I think my insight out of that is basically you need to be very, very clear in terms of that kind of trade-off, and very clear why you're not going for something kind of bigger or better, and then take the decision. But usually there will always be some fear in any big decision, and you need to be basically comfortable with that.
George, thank you for the inspirational discussion, and thanks everyone for coming.
Good luck.